attend today's session. Okay, so for this module, we will talk about comparing project alternatives. So previously, we learned how to evaluate different projects, right? Evaluate whether or not a project is worth undertaking because of economic merits. Today, we'll learn how to compare multiple projects, particularly if the selection of one project would lead to the non-selection of your other options. Na tinatawag natin ng mga mutually exclusive project alternatives or a mutually exclusive decisions. So at the end of this module, we expect for you to be able to compare mutually exclusive project alternatives using equivalent worth methods and also using rate of return methods. Basically, you should be able to select a preferred alternative given a decision problem with multiple mutually exclusive options. All right. So this module presupposes that you learned the previous lesson quite well. So okay lang ba to assume that you've thoroughly understood the previous module? If yes, can I get a heart react? Okay, very good. All right, so let's begin. So as a recap of our previous lesson, mutually exclusive alternative, we say that our alternatives are mutually exclusive if selection of one would lead to non-selection of the others in the mix. For instance, naalala niyo yung mga examples natin last time was the first place you would visit when the quarantine is lifted. Diba? There's only one option and all the other options would be non-selected or would not be selected if you already chose one. Or say, who will you marry? And also recap, no, service projects with fixed amount of output and the selection of among the different alternatives will only be based on the costs or the input. For instance, for baking a cake, for your cake business, would you rather use gas range or electric oven? No, so the output would just be more or less the same. No? The ability to bake cakes for, let's say, your business, pero the input would probably be quite different. The inputs could be how much the actual equipment would cost in gas range or electric oven. How much would it cost to operate it? Diba? So yun yung mga difference in the inputs. O kaya naman, another example of a choice involving service project would be choice between using a hand dryer or a paper towel when drying hands. Diba? So the same output, which is dried hands after washing, but maybe different investment costs and different operating costs as well. In contrast, we have what we call revenue projects, where revenues and costs vary with project choice. So for instance, save money in a bank or start a business. Diba? Parehas yan, may revenue, it could also vary in costs. Or build a school or a hospital. So they would probably have different dynamics when it comes to cash flows and different investment costs then. We say in terms of alternatives, you have cost alternatives and you have investment alternatives. So cost alternatives, when we say cost alternatives, cost lang yung pinag-iba ng mga alternatives natin. So either all of them wouldn't have revenues, so lahat sila parang service projects, or that they all have the same output. So then we do not need to compare their revenues anymore. Yeah, other type of alternative, the other classification is investment alternative, wherein the choice between these alternatives involve initial cash flows and produces positive cash flows either from increased revenues or savings. No? So yung positive cash flow again could be revenues, ibig sabihin may incoming, or savings, ibig sabihin reduction in costs, right? And the selection of the best deal among different choices, no? So it involves economic analysis first to be able to select kung ano yung best option among our pool of alternatives. All right. It's important in comparing alternatives that we define an analysis period. No? So when we say analysis period, it's a time span over which the economic effects of a project or multiple projects would be evaluated. And when analysis period is also known as study period or planning horizon. This is different from product service life. When we talk about product service life, basically it's a time over which a project or an equipment or an asset will be serviceable. So ito yung service life natin. It's also called useful life in economics. The service life of a multi-component project or equipment is determined by the service life of the shortest lived component of the project. So, for instance, meron kang computer tapos yung pinaka-fragile na component na yon, that would dictate the service life of the entire computer unless you make it a part of your project to replace regular yung short-lived component na yun. All right. Next naman, and this is the meat of our lesson for today. How do we actually compare alternatives? So we compare alternatives. Sabi natin kanina, we learned how to compare alternatives using equivalent worth methods and using rate of return methods. When comparing using equivalent worth methods, we call that the total investment approach. No? When if we want to compare using rate of return methods such as IRR method or the benefit cost ratio method, we use what we call the incremental investment approach. Let me point out as early as now that both of them would actually yield the same comparison results. So consistent naman principles underpinning these two methods. Now, let me also point out that before you compare alternatives, evaluate first the acceptability of each alternative. So you need to be able to check first whether an alternative is acceptable before you compare it with other alternatives. Is that clear? So, yeah. And I trust that you all already know how to evaluate the acceptability of an alternative. Can you click on the yes button, the check mark if so? And so I reckon most of you yes naman. Okay, so let's start with the total investment approach. So with the total investment approach, what we do is to determine, calculate using present worth method, future worth, or annual worth methods. So what's important here when comparing using the total investment approach is that we compare over an equal time span. All right. So all the alternatives should be analyzed over the same study period or planning horizon. So what we do is we calculate for the net present worth of the projects at an interest equal to the MARR. And when we're comparing investment alternatives, we select the alternative that has the highest net present worth. For cost alternatives, we select the alternative that has the least negative present worth. All right. Alternatively, we can use the net annual worth or the net future worth. Again, also using I equals MARR. Now, it's best to learn this through calculation, no? Or through an example. So suppose you own a parcel of land in the middle of a business district, let's say, Ortigas. You have two options. No? Your first option is to pave the lot and convert it to parking space. In doing so, you would need 1,000,000 pesos to pave the lot, and you expect to earn 10 million pesos annually. Another alternative would be to construct a small commercial building, and that would cost you 30 million. But once you have the building, after year two or starting year two, you'll be able to lease office spaces, and you can earn as much as 18 million pesos annually starting year two. All right. Now, if the MAR is 12% and the analysis period is 10 years, which of the following, which of the two is a better alternative? No? So let's try. Let me just draw the cash flow diagram kasi madali lang yung cash flow diagram ng nung alternative A. Madali lang yung diagram ng alternative A. So let's try to draw the diagram for alternative B. So let's say this is your timeline. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. And then initially, sabi natin, meron tayong 30 million cash flow ay year zero. Let's Tapos sa year 1, wala tayong cash flow. Ang unang cash flow natin ay sa year 2. So, lagyan natin ng tick mark sa year 1 para to indicate na meron dyang year na walang cash flow. Tapos over until year 10, continuous naman na yung pasensya nyo na at hindi equally spaced na, pero at may mga nakalutang. This is difficult drawing sa Zoom. In any case, nakakailan na 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Isa pa. Hanggang year 10 tayo. Yan. And all the cash flows na upward are worth 18 billion. Now, can you guys calculate for the net kasi madali na i-calculate yung net present worth ng alternative A. Can you guys calculate the net present worth for alternative B? Yeah. So the net present worth for the alternative B, and please type them in the chat box. Kahit nasa sa direct message lang to me. Okay, I see one answer, and that's correct. No? Let's wait for the others to finish calculating. Okay, dalawa na. Hintay pa tayo ng dalawa. Ayan. Okay, the net present worth for project B is 55,632,585.94. Yeah. So I hope we all got the same answer. Can I get a thumbs up if we all got the same answer? Mukhang yes. Maybe the others are still trying to calculate, but I hope we all arrive at the same answer. No? If we do the same and calculate for the net present worth of alternative A, we'll get 55.1 million. Now, if we decide to convert them to annuities instead, let's say, yung buong cash flow, papalitan natin ng annuity running from year 1 to year 10 lang, it will result in a net annual worth for option A na 9.82 million and 9.85 million for alternative B. Since the net present worth of alternative B is higher, even if slightly, higher than option A, anong ibig sabihin nito? Ibig sabihin nito, option B is the more preferable alternative. No? So that's the more profitable of our option, and therefore we should go with that. Okay. Please also note that even if we do net annual worth analysis instead, we should arrive at the same conclusion. So parehas lang kasi consistent naman yung equations na pinanggalingan niya. Alright? Is everything clear so far? If it's clear, can I get a check? Can I get a check? Yes. If not, please type your question in the chat box. Okay, mukhang clear naman. Thank you everyone for your active participation. Next, let me just it's supposed to be 55.1 pa. Double check na lang ng calculations. Ang pinagkaiba lang naman nila, the annuity starts at year 1, tapos 10 million, tapos 1 million yung sa simula. Alright? So, yeah. Let me just remove the annotations. And then we'll proceed to the next slide. Now the next question is, what if the projects have different useful lives? So anong ginagawa natin dito? What we do is we set the analysis period or the study period or the planning horizon to be equal to the least common multiple of the project lives. Okay? And because syempre, hindi naman pwedeng kung kunyari 10 years yung project life ng isa pero 20 years yung study period, hindi natin makomplete yung analysis kasi you have to compare them apples to apples. No? So you have to repeat the project cycle para mapuno natin yung study period. Alright? So, however, dito sa na to, we use an assumption called repeatability assumption. Ang sinasabi sa assumption na to is that even if we repeat the project or if we repeat the project at a later time, parehas pa rin yung mga economic consequences niya. So hindi siya exactly but it's hindi siya exactly a perfect assumption, but it's an assumption that we need to make for us to be able to do this analysis. Okay. So we use the least common multiple so that the cash flows will terminate at the same time. So once we're able to do that, kunyari, annotation button. Kunyari na lang one of the projects run for, one of the projects run for 6 years and the other project runs for only 3 years. So yung project na shorter yung life, uulitin natin over the period of hanggang mapuno natin yung 6 years. Kunyari ito yung project na 3 years lang yung yung lifespan. At the end of the project, kailangan maglagay tayo ng simula ulit, no? So, ito yung pinaka year zero niya ulit. Tapos, may tatlo ulit siya na upward arrows. Yan. So, di ba? Para meron na tayong parang 6-year na project. Again, ang important premise nito is the repeatability assumption. Okay, so that's what we do when we have projects or alternatives with different useful lives. Yung isang option pa natin, aside from their LCM, the projects also co-terminate at time equals infinity. No, di ba? And kaya ito na-float kasi we learned how to calculate yung mga perpetual annuities. So if it's mostly annuities, then it will be easy to calculate for their present worth using yung pag-aralan natin ng P is equal to just A over I. Yeah, so this is one option as well. Sometimes it's easier to calculate the capitalized worth than to get the net present worth of a project repeated over multiple years. Right? So there. So basically, ganun yung ginagawa natin. So I unshared the screen. So that's for total investment approach. Now, what do we do when comparing projects using rate of return methods? So ito medyo gusto kong i-elaborate. No? But before I start elaborating, let me ask you. So last year, Company A posted a return on investment of 25%, while Company B earned 30%. Which of the companies do you think earned bigger? Which of the companies do you think earned bigger? Type lang sa chat box. Wala na ba mag-type ng sagot? Okay. So, depends, di ba? Just basing on the percentage, does it tell us anything? For all we know, si Company A invested 100 million, tapos kumita siya ng 25%, and therefore that's 25 million. And si Company B invested 50 million and earned 30% of it, so that's 15 million. So even if the percentages are higher, mas malaki in general yung kinita. In absolute terms, mas malaking kinita ni Company A. So the answer, correct naman yung mga pinigyan sa atin, it depends on the amount they initially invested. Now, if you want to determine the more profitable alternatives, we shouldn't be just comparing rates. Similarly, when doing economic analysis, we do not simply compare rates. Kaya, yun, ang principle behind incremental investment analysis is that we don't just simply compare IRRs and BC ratios when selecting the best project. All right? So, agree naman. Hopefully, agree lahat, no? Now, paano yung ginagawa natin? So, the incremental investment approach is applicable for the IRR method and the benefit cost ratio method. Ang ginagawa natin dito is that we calculate the incremental cash flow. So, it's essentially the difference between the two cash flows. In principle, what we do with incremental investment approach is that titignan natin, worth it ba yung additional na investment na isi-spend mo? And is it economically justified? Ibig sabihin, are you getting your um, acceptable return rate for that additional investment? It's easier demonstrated using an example. So let's have an illustrative example for incremental IRR method. All right. So, ano yung first step na kailangan natin gawin? Meron tayong 4 options na projects. All of them run for 3 years. Tapos ito yung mga economic consequences nila in terms of their investment cost at year 0 and the corresponding na cash flows for the first 3 years. So in step 1 is to calculate the internal rate of return for each alternative. And last, is it safe to assume that you all know how to calculate the IRR for each of these alternatives? Can I get a check mark or a thumbs up, whatever is easier for you to do? Kung kayang-kaya na natin to, and that I can leave it for you to check yung accuracy nitong values na ito. So mukhang okay naman tayo. So based on our calculation, so that was yung calculation nitong IRR. Ito yung part nung nung module natin last week. Okay? So I hope you still recall yung last week's lesson. Now, so ang first premise natin is that all the alternatives should pass yung acceptability criterion natin. And basically for IRR method, the IRR should be greater than the MARR. And since yung IRR natin for alternative delta is 14.47, it's less than 15%, which is our MARR, then we exclude that from the selection. Okay? So maalis na natin yan, si alternative delta. Anong next step natin? The next step is to arrange your alternative from the cheapest to the most expensive in terms of the investment cost. In terms of the initial cost. So kapag in-arrange natin sila, beta would be the least expensive followed by alpha, and the most expensive would be gamma. Now, the alternative with the least initial cost, we accept that as our base alternative. Okay, so in this case, in this example's case, that will be beta. Now, next, the ginagawa natin is compare them pairwise, starting from the least and the second to the lowest na cost. So, that said, compare natin alpha with beta. And you notice here, we get the incremental cash flow, alpha minus beta. Basically, ano yung karagdagan sa cash flow natin if we go for alpha instead of beta? If we go for alpha instead of beta, we will have to invest an additional 2,000 more. And then, yung incremental cash flow natin for the succeeding 3 years are 0, 1,000, and 2,000 respectively. Ang next na gagawin natin dito is to compute for the IRR of this incremental cash flow. So to give you sample example, a sample computation, rather, para pa-calculate natin yung IRR niyan, and also to give you a recap kung paano siya kina-calculate. So diba, sabi natin, para ma-solve natin yung IRR, kukunin natin yung net present worth niyan. Zero divided by 1 plus IRR. Okay? Plus 1,000 is 1 plus IRR divided by, sorry, divided by 1 plus IRR raised to the 2 plus 2,000 divided by 1 plus IRR raised to the 3. Yan. And we equate that to 0. Diba? We equate that to 0 and then solve for IRR. Tama, diba? Ganito yung naaral natin nung previous na module. And so if you do that, no, what are you able to calculate? Sige nga. Please type in the chat box kung ano yung makakalculate nyo na IRR. So ayan, may nakita na akong isang answer. How about the others? Okay, so yung IRR nung incremental cash flow ng alpha minus beta is equal to, reveal natin, oops, 16.54%. Correct, no? Correct naman yung mga piniem nyo sa akin. No? Ano ibig sabihin? 16.54% yung IRR natin. What does that tell us? That is greater than 15%. Therefore, this Project Alpha is actually more worth undertaking than Project Beta. Ibig sabihin ng Alpha is better than Beta, and we can now set Alpha as our base alternative and eliminate Beta. Okay? So yan, eliminated na si Beta, si Alpha na ngayon yung bago nating base alternative. Ngayon, on the contrary, kung hindi papasa, kung hindi papasa yung IRR ng incremental cash flow, dun sa requirement natin na dapat greater than MARR, what we do is we should retain yung initial na base alternative natin and si alpha yung aalisin natin. Ang reason behind that is yung gagastasin mo na additional, hindi siya worth in terms of its economic returns. Okay? So, gagawin natin, uulitin natin pairwise comparison hanggang makaabot tayo sa costliest alternative. No? So, for instance, na-eliminate na natin si beta, we have alpha as the base alternative, and si gamma na yung kasunod na i-evaluate natin. So, ito yung incremental cash flow, gamma minus alpha. So, negative 2,000, ibig sabihin 2,000 additional initial cost. Tapos for year 1, less yung returns natin kay gamma. So negative 1,000. Pero yung year 2, may additional ka na 1,000 and year 3, may additional ka na 3,000. Pero pag kinalculate natin yung rate of return nito, yung IRR ng gamma minus alpha, it is just 12.63%, which tells us na less than MARR natin yan. And so, kailangan nating eliminate si gamma and retain alpha as the base alternative. And because alpha, siya na lang natitira, naubos na natin, na-eliminate na natin iba, then that tells us that alpha is the best alternative. Alright? Is this illustration clear to everyone? If it is, can I get a thumbs up or a check mark? Okay, thank you. So you will notice actually that the principle behind is pretty simple. The question sent to me by direct message is, possible po pa sa step 1 na walang mai-eliminate alternative? The answer is yes. No? The answer is yes. In principle, you can have 8 alternatives at walang may eliminate kahit isa. Therefore, you would have to repeat steps 5 or multiple times, no, hanggang maubos mo lahat ng mga alternatives. I hope that clearly answers your question. Basically, ang sinasabi lang natin sa step 1, nire-remind lang tayo to check or to ensure that all the alternatives being compared are acceptable. Alright? So, kung clear na ito, mukhang natutunan nyo naman na lahat, no? So you can also test for this similar na example that we had earlier, and you have the answers here. No, so I'll leave it to you to use that as an exercise. Punta tayo dun sa next method natin, which is the incremental benefit cost ratio method. No? Basically, pares ang principle behind. So what we'll do is we'll have an illustrative example instead. No? So assuming you have 3 project alternatives, all of them run for a period of 25 years, and that the MARR is 10%. So, project A, B, and C, ito yung mga cash flow nila. And then the benefit cost ratio, do you all know how to calculate the benefit cost ratio given these values? Thumbs up na lang if yes. Very good. No? So, I'm glad nakasunod tayo sa CE22 lessons natin. Now, so our first step is to again check whether or not they're all eligible for comparison. So, yan. So lahat sila, project A, project B, project C. So lahat sila greater than 1 yung benefit cost ratio, and therefore they're all acceptable. No, so we should not eliminate them. Lahat sila in contention. Ito yung sinasabi ko, actually ito yung medyo mas madalas na nakikita natin may mali sa sa mga feasibility studies, no, conducted by supposedly professionals, no. So sasabihin nila, project C has a higher benefit cost ratio, therefore we should go with that, no. So that's incorrect. No, so ang sinasabi lang nito, since project C has a 1.36 na na benefit cost ratio, ibig sabihin lang, that is acceptable. Pero to say that it's the best alternative, that's premature. Yung step 2 natin is to arrange them in terms of initial investment cost. So the initial investment cost, 500 million, 800 million, and 1.5 billion. So projects C, A, and B. The next natin, kukunin natin yung incremental cash flow. Incremental cash flow ng project A and project C kasi sila yung dalawang pinaka mas mura. No? So ito yung incremental cash flow nila. And from there, we can calculate the benefit cost ratio. So you'll notice here, yung annual benefit natin, siya lang yung nasa taas, no, yung 20 million. Yung iba nasa ilalim, investment cost, 300 million cost yan. Annual operation and maintenance cost yan. Salvage value is savings, no? Kasi synonyms yan, diba? Salvage and save. No? So that's 200 million, so that's negative costs na nasa denominator din. Now, if we calculate for the benefit cost ratio of this, that will give us a benefit cost ratio of less than 1. So anong gagawin natin? We eliminate alternative A. So, yan. So, ligwak natin si project A, and we retain project C as our base alternative. So, dahil natanggal na si A, kay C pa rin natin i-compare si project B. which would be our next step, no? Ngayon kung mas marami pa kayong alternatives, pairwise comparison lang natin sila hanggang maubos yung alternatives. Now, comparing project B with C, no? Kunin natin yung incremental cash flow. So, you have to spend 1 billion pesos more for project B compared to project C. Pero ito yung mga incremental na mga benefits, operational cost, and salvage value. And you'll see here that if we get the benefit cost ratio of that incremental cash flow B minus C, that gives us a benefit cost ratio of 1.3. No? Ang ibig sabihin na justified yung additional spending natin for project B. And therefore, we can eliminate C rather and make B as our base alternative. And then because we have no other projects to compare with B instead, no, then we can say that project B is our best alternative. Okay, so clear ba itong example na ito? Can I get a heart react if it's clear? Okay, so thank you for your active participation. I guess yun, yung basically yung coverage ng ating module, is this module 5? Yeah, module 5 na yata tayo. So thank you for listening, and we will now open the breakout sessions for if you have questions and consultations about the project. So